The clatter of silver on porcelain was the metronome of Ilara's life, a soundscape set against the low hum of conversations that cost more per minute than she made in a week. At Aurelian, where the steaks were aged for 60 days and the wine list had its own security detail, she had learned the art of invisibility. For 2 years, she had been a whisper in a starched black vest and a pristine white apron, her movements a fluid, practiced choreography of refilling water glasses and clearing plates. Her face was a study in polite neutrality, but behind her placid, earth-toned eyes, a mind that once mapped the secret histories of stones was now just trying to map a path out of a mountain of debt. Ilara wasn't just shy, she was quiet in her soul, a creature of rock faces and dusty libraries, not the polished marble and hushed reverence of New York's financial Olympus. She should have been finishing her doctorate in geology, specializing in piezoelectric minerals and their anomalous formations. But then her mother's illness, a creeping fog of neurological decline, had returned with a vengeance. The PhD was shelved, the student loans metastasized, and the family home in upstate New York, the only thing her father had left them, was now teetering on the brink of foreclosure. So, she traded geological surveys for wines pairings, serving men who strip-mined continents with the same casual indifference they use to order dessert. Tonight, the apex predator was holding court at table 12, the restaurant's coveted corner booth with a panoramic view of the city lights. His name was Alistair Finch. Even if you'd never heard of Finch Consolidated, a global behemoth that devoured companies in energy, logistics, and deep earth mining, you knew his kind. His suit was a whisper of dark grey cashmere that likely cost more than her mother's annual medical expenses. The watch on his wrist wasn't just telling time. It was mocking it, a piece of intricate machinery worth a small fortune. But it was his eyes that held the true measure of the man, a pale, piercing grey, like a winter sky over a frozen lake. They saw everything and valued nothing. With him were 2 men who orbited him like nervous moons. One was a portly, florid man named Benson, a senior VP whose primary function seemed to be laughing too loudly at Finch's non-jokes. The other was a younger, sharper man, Kaito, Finch's head of acquisitions, whose silence was more intimidating than Benson's sycophantic chatter. Ilara was clearing their appetizer plates, her presence as unobtrusive as a shadow, when the object was placed on the table. It wasn't large, fitting easily in the palm of a man's hand, but it drew all the light in the room to it. It was a stone, a raw, uncut mineral of a kind she had never seen. It was a deep, impossible blue, almost black, but shot through with veins of what looked like solidified electricity, a filament of silver that seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light. It rested on a velvet cloth, a captive heart ripped from the deep earth. $150 million in exploratory drilling, 3 teams of the world's top geologists, and they bring me this, Finch said, his voice a low vibration of controlled fury. He nudged the stone with a manicured finger. And they can't tell me what it is, where to find more of it, or what it does. All they know is that it generates a stable, low-level energy field, unlike anything ever recorded. It's beautiful, Alistair, Benson offered, his jowls quivering with enthusiasm. A true treasure. A treasure is something you can put in a vault, Benson, Finch snapped, his gaze fixed on the stone. This is a key to a door I can't find. It's useless. My experts talk about seismic data and spectral analysis. They give me charts and reports. He made a dismissive gesture. My grandfather, he'd have spat on their charts. He was an old prospector. He'd have held a stone like this, felt its story, and walked straight to the motherlode. But that kind of knowledge is dead, replaced by algorithms and idiots in lab coats. Ilara froze. Her hand, holding a silver crumb scraper, paused for a fraction of a second. Felt its story. The phrase was a ghost, a perfect echo of her father's voice. He had been a prospector, a geologist of the old school, a man who believed every rock had a biography written in its grain, its heft, its subtle inclusions. He had taught her to read them, to feel the immense pressure that formed a piece of granite, to see the flash flood that tumbled a river stone smooth. He died broke and dismissed. His theories about deep earth piezoelectricity laughed out of every university that now employed the very men Finch had on his payroll. Finch's casual, arrogant dismissal of them was, in a strange way, a deeper insult to her father's memory. Finch's cold eyes flickered up and caught her hesitation. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone making it clear that a problem would not be tolerated. Ilara's face warmed with a sudden flush. "No, sir. My apologies." She moved to continue her task, but Benson, eager to curry favor, seized the opportunity. "Look at this, Alistair. Even the staff is mesmerized. You should put it in a museum." "I don't collect museum pieces," Finch said, his attention still snagged on Ilara. He saw her eyes, not on him, but locked on the stone with an intensity that was entirely out of place. It wasn't the vacant awe of a layman. It was the focused, analytical gaze of a jeweler, a craftsman. An involuntary whisper escaped Ilara's lips, a thought that took form as sound before she could stop it. "The twinning is all wrong." The low hum of the restaurant seemed to vanish. Benson's sycophantic smile froze. Kaito, the silent one, slowly lifted his head. Alistair Finch's expression shifted from irritation to a dark, predatory curiosity. He leaned forward slightly. "What did you say?" Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. She clamped her mouth shut. It was an academic reflex, the kind of observation she would have made in a lab with her father. "Nothing, sir." "I apologize." She began to back away. No." The word was soft, but it had the force of a slammed door. He held up a hand. "Stay. You said, the twinning is all wrong. Explain." He gestured to the stone. "You, the waitress, you have an opinion on my $1 billion paperweight?" Benson let out a braying laugh. "Perhaps she minored in geology at community college, Alistair." The mockery was a spark on dry tinder. The years of quiet frustration, of watching her father's legacy be forgotten, of serving men who wouldn't exist without the resources men like her father discovered. It all coalesced into a single, cold point of anger. Her shyness was a physical weight in her stomach, but the anger was a strange, buoyant force. "Twinning," she said, her voice quiet but carrying in the sudden silence of the table, "is when two separate crystals share some of the same crystal lattice points. It creates a seam, a pattern. It's a record of the mineral's growth and the pressures it was under." She looked directly at Finch, her gaze unwavering. "The twinning in that specimen isn't geological. It's not from pressure or heat. It's concentric, like growth rings on a tree. It grew outwards from a single point, layer by layer in a near-perfect vacuum. Whatever that is, it wasn't formed in the earth. It was formed by it. It's a concretion, a pearl. The earth was the oyster." The silence that followed was absolute. Benson's jaw hung slightly agape. Kaito's pen, which had been hovering over a notebook, was perfectly still. Alistair Finch stared at her. He didn't know the science, not like she did, but he knew the language of conviction. He knew the sound of truth. His teams of experts had given him data. This quiet, trembling girl had given him a narrative, a story he could feel. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had just found a unicorn in his garden and was already pricing the cage. "Well, well," he breathed, "a prodigy in an apron." He leaned back, his grey eyes glittering. "Hiding in plain sight, serving breadsticks. This is wonderful." He laughed, a sharp, barking sound that turned heads at nearby tables. "All right, prodigy, let's play a game." He tapped the stone. "You think you're so smart? You think you can read this thing's story? You tell me something useful? Not poetry about oysters. Tell me something I can put on a map. Tell me where to find more." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was meant for the whole restaurant to hear. "You do that right here, right now, and I'll give you $10 million. The number hung in the air, obscene and absurd. Benson snorted, trying to stifle a laugh. "But," Finch continued, his smile hardening, "if you're wrong, if you're wasting my time with some half-remembered trivia from a textbook, you're not just fired. I'll see to it that you never work in a service position in this city again. I'll make your life a quiet, miserable hell." How does that sound? It was a public execution, a cruel, theatrical display of power designed to humiliate her into silence. He wanted her to stammer, to cry, to apologize and flee, so he could go back to being bored and powerful. Ilara looked at the stone. It felt like a piece of her father's soul sitting on the table. She looked at her mother's future, a grim landscape of mounting bills and fading memories. She looked at Alistair Finch, a man who had everything and understood nothing. Her shyness was a screaming siren in her mind, but her father's voice was a steady, low hum beneath it. "Listen to the stone, Ellie. It never lies." "Can I hold it?" she asked. Finch's smile widened. He was enjoying this immensely. "By all means." Kaito, the silent lawyer, almost flinched, as if she were about to touch a holy relic. With a hand that was surprisingly steady, Ilara reached out and picked up the stone. The moment it settled into her palm, the world outside of it disappeared. The restaurant, the people, the suffocating scent of money, it all faded. The stone was cool to the touch and unnaturally heavy, dense. She closed her eyes, a habit her father had taught her, to shut out the noise of the world and listen only to the object. She felt the subtle, rhythmic vibration against her skin, the low-level energy field the scientists had detected. But to her, it wasn't a field. It was a pulse, a heartbeat. She turned it over and over, her thumb tracing the crystalline veins. They weren't random. They formed a pattern, a latticework that was almost biological. "Your teams were looking for a volcanic source," she said, her eyes still closed. "A kimberlite pipe, something deep and violent." Finch said nothing, but his stillness was an answer. "You won't find it there," she continued. "This wasn't born of fire, it was born of water and immense, sustained pressure." She opened her eyes. "There's an inclusion here." She pointed with her fingernail to a microscopic speck, a tiny flaw that any normal person would have missed. "It's a diatom, a fossilized, single-celled algae. But this species, it's only found in water with an extremely high concentration of dissolved silica and rare earth metals. It's a unique biomarker." She looked up at Finch. "Your grandfather was right. You don't need algorithms. You need a better map. You're looking at seismic charts. You should be looking at ancient hydrology maps, pre-glacial riverbeds. Specifically, you need to find a place where one of these ancient, mineral-rich rivers was subducted underground by a tectonic shift." She saw Kaito's hand begin to move, scribbling furiously in his notebook. Finch was leaning so far forward he was almost out of his seat. His face was a mask of pure, predatory focus. Where? He rasped. Ilara looked at the tablet on the table, which displayed a complex topographical map of a mountain range in the Yukon. Her finger hovered over the screen, then landed on a small, insignificant-looking valley, a place marked as geologically stable and unremarkable. A place no one would ever think to drill. Here, she said. It's a blind valley. The old riverbed runs right under it, but the pressure isn't coming from below. It's coming from above. She traced a line on the map. This mountain, Mount Geryon. Your surveys say it's solid granite. They're wrong. The core isn't granite. It's a remnant iron meteorite of incredible density. It's been sitting there for 50,000 years, pressing down on that subducted riverbed. The pressure is unimaginable. It's a natural geological press. That's where your mineral is being formed. Slowly, one layer at a time, over millennia. She placed the stone back on the velvet cloth. Her hand was trembling now, the adrenaline finally catching up to her. And the 10 million? She whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. I'll need a cashier's check, not a personal one. Alistair Finch's jaw was tight. He wasn't smiling anymore. He wasn't amused. He looked at the map. He looked at the stone. He looked at the terrified, defiant waitress who had just, in the space of 3 minutes, completely dismantled the work of his $100 million research division. He looked at Kaito, who simply gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Finch slowly reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He didn't pull out a checkbook. He pulled out a sleek, black business card and a heavy, gold-plated pen. He looked around the restaurant, at the curious, staring faces. He saw liabilities. He saw witnesses. "Benson," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Pay our bill. Then pay every bill for every table in this restaurant. Inform the manager that a private event is starting now. I want this room cleared in 5 minutes." Benson, looking utterly bewildered, scrambled to obey. "Kaito," Finch continued, his eyes never leaving Ilara's. "Get the car. Contact the Yukon team. Tell them to halt all drilling at Site A. Move all assets to the Geryon Valley. And get our legal team to start acquiring every claim and mineral right within a 50-mile radius. Use the Shell Corporation. Now." Kaito nodded and was gone in a silent rush. The restaurant erupted into a confused buzz as Benson began his strange, magnanimous task. But at table 12, a bubble of cold silence had formed around Alistair Finch and Ilara. He pushed the business card and pen across the table. "The $10 million was a joke," he said, his voice flat and cold as the stone on the table. "Public spectacle. A figure of speech." Ilara's heart, which had been hammering with a wild, terrified hope, plummeted into an icy abyss. Of course it was a joke. "But the information you've just provided," he continued, steepling his fingers, his grey eyes pinning her to her seat, "is the single most valuable asset my company has acquired in the last decade. So we have a new situation, you and I. You have a mind that I need. And I," he paused, a flicker of that dangerous smile returning, "have your $10 million. And your entire future." He slid the pen closer to her. "Let's discuss the terms of your employment. And your silence." The restaurant emptied in a wave of bewildered gratitude. Patrons who had been enjoying their $300 entrees were suddenly informed their evening was a gift from the man in the corner booth. The maitre d', a man who typically viewed Ilara as a necessary but uninteresting piece of furniture, now watched her with a mixture of awe and terror, certain she was either Finch's secret mistress or his illegitimate daughter. But at table 12, the air was as thin and cold as a mountain top. "I'm not for sale, Mr. Finch," Ilara said, Her voice was a fragile thread in the sudden quiet, but it didn't break. She pushed the business card back toward him. "You made a public offer. I met the terms." Finch let out a sigh, the sound of a patient man explaining a complex concept to a simple-minded child. "Miss, I don't even know your name." "Ilara Vance." "Miss Vance, Ilara, let's be adults. A verbal contract made under such circumstances is unenforceable. Ask any lawyer. Ask Kaito if he were here. The moment I write you that check, a dozen government agencies will want to know why Finch Consolidated just transferred 8 figures to a waitress. The press will have a field day, and more importantly," he leaned in, his voice dropping, "my competitors will happen. Specifically, Silas Croft at GeoCorp. You know that name?" Ilara nodded. Croft was a legend, a corporate raider who had famously tried a hostile takeover of Finch Consolidated a decade ago. It was the stuff of business school legend. "Croft has been shadowing my Yukon project for a year," Finch said. "He knows I'm onto something, but he doesn't know what. If he sees a payment like that, to someone like you, he won't just wonder why. He will find you. And Silas Croft, Ilara, does not make offers. He takes. He will rip that information out of your life, piece by piece, starting with whatever you hold most dear. He'll find your family, your history, your every weakness. And once he has what he wants, you become a loose end. Do you understand the kind of loose end I'm talking about?" The warmth that had flooded Ilara's veins moments before turned to ice. He was painting a picture of a world she had only read about, a brutal, unforgiving place. "You're trying to frighten me," she whispered. "I am succeeding in frightening you," he corrected, his tone devoid of emotion. "I am giving you a glimpse of reality. That money isn't a prize. It's a gravestone. It's a target on your back and on the back of your family." He paused, his gaze sharpening as if he were reading her file. "You have a mother, upstate. Her medical situation is precarious. The family home has 2 mortgages on it." Ilara flinched as if struck. He couldn't know that. Kaito. In the few minutes he was gone, he must have. She felt a wave of nausea. They hadn't just been sitting there. They had been dissecting her life. "So here is my real offer," Finch continued, ignoring her distress. He turned the business card over. On the stark white back, he began to write with the heavy gold pen. "You will come to work for me, effective immediately. You will be a special consultant to the CEO. You will have a lab, resources, anything you need to help us replicate your method, to turn your party trick into a science." He pushed the card across the table. "I will provide a signing bonus of $1 million. It will be paid through a tax-sheltered fund, clean and untraceable. Your annual salary will be $750,000. And," he looked up, his eyes locking with hers, "I will assume all of your mother's medical debts and ongoing care. She will be moved to the finest private facility in the country. My personal physicians will oversee her case. The house upstate will be cleared of all liens. It will be yours, free and clear. All of this, in exchange for your expertise." He sat back, "and your absolute, unbreakable silence. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement, so comprehensive it will cover your thoughts." It was a golden cage, furnished with everything she had ever desperately needed. Her mother's health, financial security, a chance to do the work she was born for. But the bars were forged from his control. The price was her soul. "You're not giving me a choice," she said numbly. "I am giving you the only choice that ensures your survival," he said. "If you say no, then you are just a clumsy waitress who bothered me, I'll have you fired. You'll go back to your debts, your sick mother, and the wolves. Because I assure you, if you walk out that door, I might just have an anonymous tip delivered to a friend at the Wall Street Journal about a waitress with a magic touch for geology. Croft will be on your doorstep before dawn. He gestured to the card. The sanctuary or the wilderness. The choice is yours. You have 60 seconds. He picked up his water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip, his eyes watching her over the rim. Ilara's mind was a maelstrom. He had her. He had anticipated every angle, leveraged every fear, weaponized every one of her vulnerabilities. He saw her as a resource to be acquired, an asset to be controlled. The $1 million offer was generous, but it was a pittance compared to the $10 million he'd promised, and an insult when measured against the quadrillion-dollar energy source she had just handed him. He thought her shyness was weakness. He thought her intellect was a raw commodity he could purchase and refine. But the same mind that could read the 30-million-year history of a stone could also read the 30-second history of a negotiation. She saw his strategy: isolate the target, assess its weaknesses, apply overwhelming force, and acquire at a discount. He had missed one thing. He hadn't insulted her. He had insulted her father, and that was a debt that couldn't be paid with a salary. "No," she said. Alistair Finch's glass stopped halfway to his lips. His eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. It was the first time she had seen him genuinely surprised. "I beg your pardon?" "No," Ilara repeated, and this time her voice was firm. She slid the business card back to him. "That is not the deal. I assure you, Miss Vance, it is the only deal." "It's a bad deal," she said, her heart hammering but her resolve calcifying. "You're right about the danger. You're right about my mother. You're right that I have no choice but to work with you. But you are profoundly wrong about the terms." She took a breath, channeling a strength she didn't know she possessed. "You don't just need a consultant, Mr. Finch. You need a Rosetta Stone. You need the one person on the planet who can read the language your billion-dollar mineral is written in. You think that stone is the prize? It's not. It's the first letter of the first word in a book you can't read." "That inclusion," I pointed out, "the diatom? It's a key. There are dozens of them, each one a biomarker for a different trace element required to stabilize the energy field. Without me to read them, your team will extract that mineral, and it will be as inert and useless as a lump of coal. You'll have the lock, but I have the key." Finch was no longer surprised. He was listening, his face an unreadable mask of granite. "So, here is my counteroffer," Ilara said, the words coming faster now. "And these terms are not negotiable. First, you will honor the original wager. $10 million. Not as a joke, not as a spectacle, but as my signing bonus. It was the price you set on my knowledge, and I will not allow you to devalue it. Mr. Kaito can structure the payment however he needs to ensure my safety from the wolves you're so concerned about." "And your salary?" Finch asked, his voice a low purr. "I don't want a salary," Ilara said. "Employees earn salaries. You are not hiring me. You are retaining my services. You will establish a research foundation, the Vance Institute for Geological Studies, in my father's name. You will fund it with an initial endowment of $20 million, and you will give it a 10% equity stake in the Geryon Valley project. All patents, all discoveries, will be held by the Institute. Finch Consolidated will have exclusive licensing rights, for which you will pay a handsome fee." She stood up, her legs feeling like they might give way beneath her, but she remained standing. "And my mother's medical care," she added, her voice softening for the first time. "That is not a negotiating point, Mr. Finch. That is the cost of admission to this conversation. That happens first, before any papers are signed. She looked him dead in the eye. Those are my terms. You have 24 hours to have Kaito draft the contract. You can send it to my apartment. I assume you know the address. She turned to walk away. You're forgetting something, Miss Vance. Finch's voice cut through the air. She stopped, her back to him. You're fired. She didn't react. She had expected it. It was his last move, the petty assertion of power he couldn't resist. Gerard, Finch called out, and the terrified Maître D' scurried over. Miss Vance's employment here is terminated, effective immediately. Please escort her out. She caused a disturbance. Gerard looked at Elara, his face a mask of horrified confusion. Miss Vance, please, your things. Elara closed her eyes for a moment, gathering herself. Then she turned around. The shy, invisible waitress was gone. In her place was someone Alistair Finch had created, someone forged in the crucible of his arrogance. She looked at him, a faint, sad smile on her lips. You just made a very expensive mistake, Mr. Finch. Oh? He raised an eyebrow. By firing you. No, Elara said. By teaching me how you do business. She walked away, not looking back, past the stunned staff who were her former colleagues. As she pushed through the heavy glass doors of Aurelian and stepped into the cool New York night, she wasn't a fired waitress. She was the founder and sole proprietor of the Vance Institute, and she had just taken on her first and most dangerous client. The adrenaline that had carried Elara through the confrontation with Finch evaporated the moment she was on the subway, leaving a residue of cold, visceral panic. She was unemployed. She had the verbal agreement for a multi-million-dollar research institute. But it was an agreement with a shark, and she was keenly aware that she was still swimming in his ocean. The 24-hour deadline she'd given him felt less like an ultimatum and more like the timer on a bomb. Her apartment, a cramped one-bedroom in a part of Queens the city's glitterati had forgotten, felt both like a sanctuary and a cage. Her mother was asleep in the bedroom, her breathing shallow. The scent of stale medicinal tea hung in the air. Elara looked at her mother's tired, sleeping face and felt the weight of her gamble settle on her shoulders. She hadn't just bet on herself. She'd bet her mother's future. Sleep was impossible. She spent the night at their small kitchen table, her father's old journals spread out before her. They were filled with his elegant, spidery script, complex diagrams, and passionate, half-mad theories. He had been so close. He had theorized about meteorite core pressure zones, about deep earth mineral concretions. He just never found one. He had left her the language, and now she had found the book. The next morning, the exhaustion was a physical ache, but her resolve was harder than ever. She waited. 9 a.m. came and went, then 10 a.m. The silence from Finch was a form of psychological warfare. By noon, a knot of dread had tightened in her stomach. Had he called her bluff? Was he, at this very moment, sending his drilling teams to the Gerrian Valley, confident they could figure it out without her? The thought was terrifying. He could try. He would fail. But he could cost her everything in the process. At 1:15 p.m., her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, a text message. Blacktown car. Your corner, 5 minutes. There was no signature. It didn't need one. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. She scribbled a quick note for her mother. Went to a job interview back soon. Love you. And grabbed her worn coat. The car was as sleek and silent as a panther. The rear door opened as she approached. Inside sat Kaito, his face as impassive as ever. He held a thick, leather-bound portfolio. Miss Vance, he said, his voice a quiet baritone. Mr. Finch accepted your terms." The relief was so profound, Elara felt dizzy. She got into the car, the scent of rich leather and clean, filtered air a world away from her apartment. "There are, however," Kaito continued, as the car pulled smoothly into traffic, "some additions for your security and ours." He opened the portfolio. The contract was a work of art, thick, creamy paper covered in dense, impenetrable legalese. Kaito walked her through it, his explanations crisp and clear. The Vance Institute would be established. The $10 million bonus would be transferred to an account of her choosing upon signing. The $20 million endowment was guaranteed. Her mother's care was already being arranged. A medical transport team was on standby. Then came the additions. She would be relocated. For her own security from Silas Croft, she would live in a corporate apartment in Finch Tower. A fully equipped geology lab would be constructed to her specifications on the floor below. She would have a security detail, reporting directly to Finch. Her communications would be monitored, her travel restricted. It was the golden cage she had feared, but with steel reinforcements. "I'm a prisoner," she said flatly. "You are a high-value asset," Kaito corrected without inflection. "And you are in the middle of a war. Mr. Finch intends to protect his investment." She read the lines, her mind racing. He was giving her everything she asked for, but he was taking her freedom. Still, the alternative was her mother's health, the loss of her home. She looked at the signature line. It was a deal with the devil, but the devil was paying in the currency she needed most. She took the pen he offered. "One more condition," she said. Kaito's eyebrow twitched, the barest hint of surprise. "I want my father's journals, all of them, and his field equipment. It's all in storage upstate. I want it brought to the lab, untouched." Kaito considered this for a moment, then nodded. "That can be arranged." Elara signed her name. The moment the ink was dry, Kaito's phone chimed. He glanced at it. "The initial transfer has been completed, Miss Vance. Welcome to Finch Consolidated." The next few weeks were a disorienting whirlwind. Her mother was moved to a beautiful sunlit room in a world-class care facility, attended by specialists who spoke to Elara with kindness and hope. The Vance Institute was legally incorporated, and Elara herself was installed on the 78th floor of Finch Tower, a sterile, minimalist apartment with breathtaking views of a city she was no longer free to walk in. Her lab on the 77th floor was a geologist's dream. Mass spectrometers, electron microscopes, holographic rock formation modelers. Her father's dusty, beloved journals sat in a climate-controlled case in the corner, a shrine to the man who started it all. Her work began in earnest. Finch's team had extracted more samples from the Gerrian Valley. They were flown in daily. The team of geologists she had to work with, led by a stern, skeptical man named Dr. Aris Thorne, treated her with a thinly veiled contempt. They were men of data and degrees. She was the Waitress prodigy, the boss's pet psychic. Finch himself was a constant, unnerving presence. He would appear in her lab at all hours, his grey eyes hungry for progress. He didn't want answers. He wanted a system, a repeatable, quantifiable method for identifying the unique biomarkers in the stones. "Intuition is not an asset I can list on a balance sheet, Elara," he would say, pacing her lab. "I need a process. I need the Elara Vance method." She worked tirelessly, fueled by a desperate need to prove that what she had wasn't magic, but a form of deep, synthesized knowledge. She cross-referenced her father's theories with the data pouring in from the new samples. She began to build a complex algorithm, linking the diatom species to specific trace elements, creating a predictive model. The men in lab coats who had initially scoffed at her began to watch her work with a grudging respect. She was bridging the gap between the old world and the new. It was during a late-night session, staring at a holographic projection of the Geryon meteorite core, that she found the anomaly. It was a discrepancy in the magnetic resonance imaging, a faint, ghost-like signal that the other geologists had dismissed as interference. But it resonated with a half-forgotten note in her father's journals. "The mother lode is never the source," he had written. "It is merely the echo. Look for the silence between the notes." She isolated the signal, running it through a dozen filters. It wasn't interference. It was a dampening field. Something inside the meteorite was actively absorbing energy. She ran a simulation. If a mineral like the one they were extracting was exposed to a specific high-frequency energy pulse, its own energy field would expand exponentially. It wasn't just a battery, it was an amplifier. But the meteorite itself was blocking that frequency. It was a natural shield. The only way to activate the vast field of the mineral below would be to find a way to bypass the shield, to find a crack in the armor. Her father's journals spoke of conduction channels, microscopic fissures in meteoritic iron that could be opened by seismic resonance. A specific vibrational frequency could, in theory, turn the entire meteorite from a shield into a conductor. She had found it. The activation key. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, not with a satisfying snap, but with the sickening lurch of a world tilting off its axis. Ilara stood in the sterile blue light of the holographic display, the image of the Geryon meteorite hanging in the air before her like a captured god. The activation key, the specific seismic frequency that would turn the mountain from a shield into a conductor, was not a discovery. It was a confession. She backed away from the console, a hand flying to her mouth as a wave of nausea washed over her. Finch wasn't a miner. A miner extracts. He takes what is there. This was different. This was alchemy, an energy source that could be amplified at will, its output scaled exponentially with a simple vibrational command, was a terrifying miracle. But a miracle that could be focused, aimed, and unleashed upon a specific point in the Earth's crust. That was not a power plant. That was a weapon. It was the power to liquefy cities, to shift tectonic plates, to hold the entire planet's fragile geology for ransom. Her mind, trained to see the slow, patient history of the Earth, was now forced to envision its violent, instantaneous future. An earthquake on demand, a tsunami triggered from a boardroom. The cold sweat on her skin had nothing to do with the lab's aggressive air conditioning. She felt trapped, not by the locked doors and silent cameras, but by the sheer, terrible weight of what she now knew. With trembling hands, she pulled up the secure files Kaito had given her access to, the ones detailing the Geryon Valley acquisitions. Her eyes scanned the dense legalese, no longer looking for financial data, but for intent. He hadn't just bought mineral rights. He'd acquired everything with a predator's thoroughness, water rights, airspace rights. And there it was again, the term that had baffled her, tectonic rights. A legal fiction, a piece of corporate audacity so profound it was almost admirable. He hadn't just bought the mountain, he had laid claim to the very forces that held it together. Then she saw it. A name on the board of directors for the primary shell corporation, Geryon Deep Earth Ventures. General Marcus Thorne, Retted. She didn't need to look him up. Thorne was infamous, a hawk who had spent his career advocating for the weaponization of natural resources, a man whose geopolitical philosophy was brutally simple. Whoever controls the ground controls the world. The Vance Institute, her father's name. It was being used as the scientific and moral cover for a project that would have horrified him. He had sought to understand the Earth, to listen to its secrets. Finch sought to gag it, to put a gun to its head. The golden cage, once a symbol of her compromised success, now felt like a weapons factory, and she was its chief engineer. The silence she had agreed to, the price for her mother's care and her own security, was no longer just a personal sacrifice. It was complicity in a potential apocalypse. For 3 days, she was a ghost in her own life. She moved through the pristine lab, feeding Finch's impatient team of geologists carefully curated, incremental data, useless scraps that kept them busy but led them nowhere near the activation key. She ate meals she couldn't taste in an apartment whose stunning views felt like a mockery. She was under constant, suffocating surveillance. The silent cameras on the ceiling felt like the eyes of God. Harris, the stoic head of her security detail, was a constant shadow, his presence a perpetual reminder of her imprisonment. Escape was a fantasy, but Finch, in his arrogance, had made a critical error. He saw her father's journals as a tool, a quaint analog database he could exploit. He never understood they were her soul. He couldn't monitor the thoughts she had while tracing her father's elegant, faded script. He couldn't place a firewall around memory. Late one night, surrounded by the scent of old paper and dried ink, she found it. It wasn't in a chapter on piezoelectricity or meteoritic pressure. It was tucked into a thin volume on Yukon flora, a book her father had used for his field notes. Pressed between a page describing the fireweed that bloomed after a forest fire and one detailing the resilience of Arctic lichen, was a folded, brittle piece of paper. A carbon copy. It was a claim, filed 22 years ago. The filing office was listed as a tiny outpost in Dawson City, a place more famous for gold rush ghosts than legal documents. But the claim was not for gold or silver or any mineral. It was a geological heritage and preservation claim. It was a legal instrument so obscure, so idealistic, that only a man like her father would have even known it existed. He had identified the entire Geryon Massif and the valley beneath it not as a resource to be exploited, but as a site of unique and irreplaceable scientific value, a geological cradle where the deep earth speaks to the sky. He had, with a $50 filing fee and a poet's conviction, declared the mountain a sanctuary. The claim predated every shell corporation, every acquisition, every tectonic right Finch's army of lawyers had concocted. It was a single, ancient stone thrown into the gears of a billion-dollar machine. Finch didn't own the mountain. Legally, morally, he was a trespasser. The paper trembled in her hand. It was a weapon, a shield. But a shield is useless without someone to wield it. She needed an army, and she was locked in the highest tower of the enemy's fortress. Her gaze fell on Harris. For weeks she had studied him, as she would a complex, crystalline structure, noting his habits, his stress points, his inclusions. He was ex-special forces, disciplined, loyal to his contract. But he was not a machine. She saw the way his eyes softened when he glanced at the photo of a smiling young girl taped to the inside of his locker. She saw the worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius that he read during the long hours of downtime. He was a man who understood duty and honor, and she could see, in the subtle tightening of his jaw, when Finch was in the lab, that he was beginning to question the nature of the duty he was performing. He was a good man in a bad position. A man under pressure. The next evening, as he escorted her down the silent, empty corridor from the lab to her apartment, she executed her plan. Carrying a precarious stack of geological charts, she feigned a stumble, sending the papers scattering across the polished marble floor. "Miss Vance," Harris said, his voice flat, but his movement immediate as he bent to help her. "I'm so sorry, Harris. So clumsy, she murmured, her heart hammering against her ribs. As their hands met, gathering the scattered charts, she pressed a tiny, tightly folded note, no bigger than her thumbnail, into the seam of his jacket cuff. Her fingers brushed his wrist. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible contact. His eyes met hers for a fraction of a second. In that moment, she wasn't his charge, and he wasn't her guard. They were two people communicating in a language older than words. He gave no sign. He simply finished gathering the papers, handed them to her, and resumed his position by her apartment door. "Have a good night, Miss Vance." The note contained a single name, a secure satellite phone number, and a 7-word message. "Tell him Finch found the cradle. The wolf is inside." The name was Silas Croft. It was the most terrifying gamble of her existence. She was unleashing the very monster Finch had used to chain her. But her father had taught her about controlled burns, about using fire to create a firebreak. Croft's avarice was legendary, but his hatred for Alistair Finch was biblical. He wouldn't care about the energy source as much as he would care about destroying the man who was about to obtain it. She wasn't giving Croft the secret to the mineral. She was giving him the legal key to Finch's public execution. The next 48 hours were the longest of her life. Every time Harris looked at her, his face an unreadable mask, she felt a jolt of pure terror. Had he gone to Finch? Was the axe already falling? The silence of the tower was no longer peaceful, it was predatory. She worked on autopilot in the lab, the hum of the servers sounding like a countdown timer. She was a woman who had pulled the pin on a grenade and was now waiting, in an enclosed space, to see if it would explode. On the morning of the 3rd day, the world caught fire. It didn't start with a news report. It started with a tremor she could feel through the floor of the building. Not a seismic tremor, but a corporate one. A flurry of red lights began flashing on the market data terminals, visible through the glass walls of the trading floor 2 levels below. Alarms, previously silent, began to chime with increasing urgency. Men in expensive suits were running. Kaito materialized, moving through the chaos with a grim, focused intensity. Then, her own unrestricted terminal, the one Finch had given her for research, lit up with a priority notification from every major news outlet simultaneously. The headline from the Wall Street Journal was a declaration of war. Rival accuses Finch consolidated of massive land fraud in Yukon Miracle. Project. Claims based on decades-old scientific preservation filing. The story was a masterclass in corporate assassination, meticulously sourced by Croft's team. It laid out Finch's web of shell companies with surgical precision. But the heart of the article, its emotional and legal core, was a high-resolution scan of a 22-year-old document from a dusty clerk's office in Dawson City. The elegant, passionate handwriting of Dr. Alaric Vance was suddenly front-page news. The article didn't just accuse Finch of fraud, it framed him as a grave robber, a corporate vulture, desecrating the legacy of a forgotten scientific visionary for a secret project with grave and undisclosed geopolitical implications. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Finch Consolidated's stock didn't just fall, it plunged from a cliff. The phrase "tectonic rights" became an instant meme, a symbol of corporate overreach. General Thorne resigned from the board, his statement citing a sudden desire to spend more time with his family. The Canadian government, embarrassed and enraged, announced an immediate freeze on all activity in the Geryon Valley and launched a full-scale investigation. Finch's empire, built on a foundation of unshakable power, was suddenly cracking at its base. The summons came without a word. The door to her lab hissed open. Alistair Finch stood there, not flanked by Kaito or security, but utterly alone. His suit was, as always, perfect. His posture was erect, but his face was a ruin. The predatory confidence was gone, replaced by a pale, hollowed-out exhaustion. The winter sky eyes were clouded with the storm that had finally broken over his head. He walked past her, his footsteps unnaturally loud in the sudden silence of the lab. He stopped before the climate-controlled case containing her father's journals. He stared at them for a long time, as if trying to understand the arcane power they contained. "You," he finally whispered. The word was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, filled with a rage so deep and cold it had burned past heat into something else entirely. "How did you do this?" "You read my father's work, but you never understood him," Ilara said. Her voice was calm. The frantic terror of the past few days burned away, leaving behind something hard and pure. "You saw his theories as a resource, but his claim, that was his heart. It was a statement of belief, that some things on this earth are worth more than their market value. Your lawyers, with all their algorithms and databases, never thought to look for a belief." "Croft," he hissed, turning to face her. "You went to the one man I told you would destroy you." "You told me he was a wolf," Ilara corrected, taking a step toward him, closing the distance. "You were right, but you built my cage in the middle of a wilderness, and you forgot that sometimes the only way to drive one predator out is to call another. They're your wolves now. They can fight over the scraps of your company in court for the next decade." He took a menacing step forward, his hands clenching into white-knuckled fists. By the door, Harris, who had been standing like a statue, shifted his weight. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but his hand drifted an inch closer to the inside of his jacket. Finch saw it. He froze. The realization that even his own security was no longer entirely his own seemed to be the final straw. The tension went out of his shoulders. He stared at her, and the rage in his eyes finally receded, replaced by a dawning, horrified awe. It was the look of a master chess player who has just been checkmated by a pawn. He had seen her as a set of variables to be controlled, a shy waitress, a desperate daughter, a brilliant but naive mind. He had never once considered the possibility that she was a geologist to her core, a woman who understood pressure, time, and the catastrophic power of a single, perfectly placed fault line. "What do you want, Ilara?" he asked, his voice raw, stripped of all its artifice. "My ruin? Is that the price?" "No," she said. "Ruin is unproductive. I'm not here to destroy you, Mr. Finch. I'm here to offer you a deal." He looked at her as if she were speaking another language. "The Vance Institute, thanks to my father's foresight, now holds the primary legal and moral claim to the Geryon Valley. It is a scientific trust," she stated, her voice as cool and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "The activation key for the mineral is the Institute's intellectual property. I am its sole director. You are currently facing decades of litigation from Croft, a hostile government investigation, and a complete collapse of shareholder confidence. You have a lock, but the mountain is no longer yours, and I have the only key." She let the silence stretch, allowing the full weight of his predicament to settle. "Or," she continued, "Finch Consolidated, or what's left of it, can become the first official partner of the Vance Institute. We will develop the Geryon project together, publicly, transparently. Not as a weapon, but as it was meant to be, a source of clean, limitless energy for the world. All patents will be held by the Institute. Your company will license the technology from us, and a full 40% of all net profits will be permanently endowed to the Institute for the sole purpose of funding independent scientific research and global environmental preservation projects. She walked to the holographic display and, with a few keystrokes, brought up a new document that floated in the air between them. It was a partnership proposal, drafted with Kaito-like precision. "You'll still be rich, Mr. Finch, richer than you can imagine. But you will be a builder, not a warlord. You will power the future, not hold it hostage. You will help me build my father's legacy, not the monument to your fear you were planning. Those are my terms, non-negotiable." Alistair Finch stared at the contract floating in the air. He looked at her face, devoid of fear or doubt. He had played a brutal game of power, leverage, and intimidation. She had responded not by playing his game better, but by creating an entirely new board with entirely new rules where his brand of power was irrelevant. A strange, ragged sound tore from his throat. It was a laugh, not of amusement or joy, but of pure, unadulterated shock. It was the sound of a man who had climbed a mountain his entire life, only to find someone standing on the summit, waiting for him. "The Vance Institute," he read from the hologram, shaking his head slowly. "Chairwoman and CEO, Ilara Vance." He looked up at her, and for the first time, his grey eyes held not contempt or calculation, but something that looked unnervingly like respect. "You are the most dangerous person I have ever met." "No," Ilara replied, her voice softening just a fraction. "I'm a geologist. I know that pressure, given enough time, doesn't break things. It transforms them into something new." She had learned his business, just as she'd promised. But in doing so, she had taught him hers. The earth keeps its own ledger of debts and legacies, a history written not in ink, but in stone. And on that day, in a lab high above the city, a new chapter was being written, one layer at a time.